Hello YouTube, Drake Clawthang here, starting off my original content fiesta with me counting down what I think are the top 5 best Final Fantasy games. I'm not necessarily saying these are my top 5 favorite, though they are my favorite pretty much. There's a lot of stuff that goes into determining what made this list, of course. Gameplay, story development, how well it was paced, the character development, the themes, the graphic design, the story design, etc. So I take everything into consideration. I'm not just, choosing willy-nilly here. I've given these choices a lot of thought. The only thing is I'm only doing the top 5 because I haven't really played that many games outside the main series, only the After Years, DO12, and Crisis Core. So, being a top 10 list, it would pretty much just be the main series rearranged in various orders. So with that said, let's go through the top 5, and don't hate me when you see my picks. Number 5 on the list is Final Fantasy VII, and here comes the hate. I know, it's probably shocking to see it so low. I played FF7 long after I'd played most of the other games in the series, so it didn't make the same impact on me as it did on a lot of other gamers. Why is it on the list at top 5? Well, first on the game's strength, I think it has a good cast of characters. Whether you love or hate all of them, FF7's cast is diverse, unique, and memorable. They all have their own backstories which are explained well and explain why they joined the party to fight Sephiroth and Shinra. I think the game's biggest strength though is an awesome skill system. The materia system is very well designed. It's simple and easy to understand, but very deep once you understand how they interact with each other and your equipment, and the vast variety of materia allows a lot of party customization. The game's flaws that hold it back: first, the graphic design. FF7's graphics are just silly. The backgrounds are highly detailed and gorgeous, but they're populated by cartoony characters with deformed limbs and bright color schemes, and the two styles don't mesh well. The other flaw, and this is a rant to get into in another vid someday, but the plot of the game is pretty weak in my opinion, and this is attributable to a weak villain. I do not think Sephiroth is a very good villain, and he drags the story down for it because the plot focuses on fighting him. The first part of the game, set in Midgar, is completely at odds with the main game in both tone and story focus, and the overarching plot with fighting Sephiroth doesn't much go anywhere until you get the tiny Bronco and see the Temple of the Ancients. Disc 2, once he finally gets the black materia, is just blatant padding. The huge materia quest not only wastes time, but the party's attempts to stop Shinra from destroying Meteor are just confusing, especially when they express dismay it doesn't work. And while this isn't really a flaw or a strength, the game just has a lot of weirdness to it. Enemy and character designs have a much stronger anime flavor than any other game in the series. The enemy designs in particular are just really weird. What the hell are these things? Other games have generic animals, demons, knights, wizards, etc. This game has this stuff. Some of the weirdness is fun though, like the infamous wall market sequence, and the environmental theme expressed through the live stream is decently done, if a bit unsubtle. Overall, Final Fantasy VII does have a lot of flaws, even setting aside its legacy and expanded universe. Its story isn't that good and isn't told very well, and its graphic design is ridiculous. But it's got good characters, a great battle system, and is overall just a lot of fun. Number 4 on my list is the most recent entry to the series, Final Fantasy XIII. It's a pretty polarizing game, and until I played it myself, I'd seen and heard plenty from both sides. Me personally, I quite enjoyed it, but I do understand why it might be hated. First, the game has a pretty good cast of characters. FF13's story centers on the 6 main characters and explores their backstories and their emotions and thoughts about the events unfolding around them. You may not like some of them, but you can understand who they are and why they act the way they do. I also think the game has a pretty good story centering around the Foul Sea, machine gods that control the world and brand humans to do their bidding. But while the characters and story are what I consider FF13's strengths, they are also part of its flaws. The game has a pretty major split in focus. The first half explores the characters and the second half deals with Barthandelus. As a result, because the first half of the game takes place in what I think is just a couple of days, characters don't come off as developing as much as they just cool off and stop to think things over. and the overarching plot with bartenderless comes off as rushed and squeezed into the last half of the game. It's poorly paced in both regards. If the character development was better paced and the bartenderless plot given more room to be explored, they both could have been executed much better. The other major flaw is the interactive movie design. Toriyama loves the concept, but I do not, and I don't think gamers do. Video games are meant to be played, not watched. If Toriyama wants to make movies, fine, he can make movies, but don't try to turn a video game into a movie. The pathway is linear for most of the game, and I frankly started to get annoyed when I saw the marker on my minimap telling me there's a cutscene coming up. Toriyama seems to be of the opinion that being linear helps tell a strong story, but if he can't tell a strong story without binding the player to a plot railroad, that's his weakness as a developer. But FF13's biggest strength is, and what redeems it for me, is what I consider the best battle system in the entire series. The paradigm system is awesome. It's fast-paced, requires you to react to the flow of battle, and relies on you knowing your enemies and how they fight and how to combat them properly. It also succeeds what many games in the series fail at. Some games like FF4 or FF9 are too rigid with character systems. Vivi casts black magic and Kane jumps. It's all they do, and it's all they will ever do. On the other hand, there's games like FF7 and FF12, where Cloud and Vaughn can do anything just like Zid and Fran can. They may not do it just as well as them due to subtle stat differences, but they'll do it just the same. I think the game should try to strike a balance between the two extremes of extreme customization and extreme rigidness, and FF13 does that. Anyone can take on any paradigm rule, but they won't do it as well as other party members, and their unique traits are clearly defined to make them play very differently, even in the same roles as each other. This gives you the freedom to use whoever you like, but you have to be aware of and take into account everyone's individual strengths and weaknesses. Overall, FF13 has a good plot, good characters, and awesome battle system. It's just held back by poor pacing and an overall poor game structure to be wrapped around. Number 3 on my list is one game back in time, Final Fantasy XII. It's the game I think came closest to breaking out of the mold for the series. It's set in the same type of pseudo-medieval Magitech-fueled world that other games are, but it plays and feels a bit differently. The flaws are minor in my opinion compared to glaring flaws like FF7's villain or FF13's linearity, but they do add up. The battle system is a bit unpolished. Some abilities like espers and technics are plain useless. And as I said before, I dislike extreme flexibility in my battle system. When the characters are only as diverse and unique in battle as I choose to make them, the characters begin to lose their identity. The very concept of the battle system is a bit odd too. I understand needing a permit to cast magic or use a particular type of weapon, but you need a license to wear particular clothes? And how do licenses boost stats? And a small but annoying flaw that caused me a couple game overs, I disliked how only so many spells can animate at once. I understand how it's due to console limitations, but too many times I got stuck waiting for another spell to complete so I could cast Kiraja while enemies with melee blows continued to wail on me. The game also doesn't develop or explore the backstories and personalities of some characters as much as they ought to, and aside from Ash, none of them get much development. Of course, when you're Balthier or Bosch, why change
I play the leading man. Who else?
Lack of development doesn't make a character bad, but some in this game, like Fran for example, is obviously just eye candy, and Penelo is just sort of there. I understand that Vaughn's desire for vengeance made him a foil to Ash, but he doesn't really do much on his own. And for the record, Ash is the main hero of my game, and she's a good one, thanks. The game's biggest flaw is that the middle part just drags. After the Tomb of Wraithwall, it's a series of fetch quests where we either find a new MacGuffin or ask someone how to use the MacGuffin we already have. And the trek to Arcadia is endless. Something else that bugs me about FF12, as TV tropes would say, it has a lot of god dang it content. Many FF games have a bit of this, but FF12 just has so much that you're never gonna know about unless you have a game guide. For example, a lot of the optional areas and the secret bosses, including the hunts. FF12's biggest strengths lie in the story. It's a tale of political intrigue, and what might have been flaws otherwise work to strengthen that idea. Your party is a minor pawn on a larger board between warring nations. All they can do is react to the moves the bigger players make and try to get leverage on them to act. The story is fueled by character egos. Mostly everyone wants peace, but there's personal pride and paranoia, so it's difficult for people to trust anyone, and everyone is doing what they think is right. Much of the story's quality can be attributed to the well-portrayed villains. FF12's villains are not the cartoonish supervillains you see in other games, including some other Final Fantasy games. They aren't evil, they're simply on a different side than you are. They're real people with honor, dignity, and perfectly understandable and reasonable motivations. And towards the end of the game, you the player might want to side with them over your own party members. The other main strength is just the overall atmosphere that's created. It has great voice acting, excellent scripting, and just the general design aesthetic create a truly deep and memorable game world. Right down to the bestiary law I'll bet none of you ever read, but you should, because it shows how much love and care went into the game's world. FF12 may not be as flashy or straightforward as other games with its story and characters and battle system, but it has subtlety and inner beauty in those aspects that make it my number 3 pick for this countdown. Number 2 on my list, and narrowly edged out of number 1, is Final Fantasy IX. Father of the series, Hironobu Sakaguchi, says it's his favorite game in the series, and it's not hard to understand why. Compared to the last 2, or really 3 games before, it takes us back to a world of princesses, knights, kingdoms, and villages, not presidents, mercenaries, and spaceships. The game contains a ton of homages to previous titles, from ability and weapon names to locations, to allusions that maybe FF9 takes place in the far future of FF1. The game's biggest strength once again is the characters. With maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, everyone in FF9 is just so memorable. From Zidane to Steiner to Cid to Aiko, you really grow to love these characters and want to see them triumph. Many of them have personal conflicts they grow to overcome, and even Zidane, as laid back and friendly as he seems, has deeper issues he has to come to terms with. Even Kuja is as developed and explored as any of the playable party members, and I think he's a good candidate for the best character arc of any main villain in the series. And with its fun-loving main hero, general design aesthetic, and wide variety of animal-like NPCs, the game is simply not afraid to have fun with itself. Which of course is good, it's a video game. If we're not having fun, why would we want to keep playing? But while I do love FF9, it does have a couple flaws. The first one that I dislike is the rigid battle system. Every party member has a specific role. As a result, for most of the game you'll just be using Zidane, Vivi, Aiko, and Steiner. They're your basic thief, black mage, white mage, and knight. The trance system is plain horrible. It takes too long to charge, doesn't last that long once it is charged, and you're liable to end up entering trance in a normal battle and lose your charge and waste it. And this may seem a bit of an odd flaw to point out, so I'll explain it of course, but the game is simply too dark. It has lighthearted moments, but from the moment you first leave Lindblum, you spend right up until the second third of Disc 3 going to towns just in time to see them get blown up. And I think the only reason you got a break after Alexandria is that the developers ran out of towns to destroy. After Alexandria, the game's story throws right into the origins of Kuja, your party is captured a couple times over, and you confront the shocking truth of Zidane's existence, and come the end of Disc 3, the world is about to end. There are a lot of dark games out there, but there always has to be some light at the end of the tunnel, and FF9 doesn't really have one. That's one of the themes of the game, really. Life is hard, and at times it's flat gonna suck, but you have to struggle onward in spite of it. But I just never felt like there was any hope to put it right. Destruction was rampant, the villains kept winning, and it never seemed like the party was making any progress to stopping them. But it's just a flaw to me. Some may like that, and that's fine. FF9's flaws are very much outweighed by its perks, an awesome and well-developed cast, a fun game world, and flawed but still enjoyable story and battle system. And so we come to my pick for the best Final Fantasy game ever. And anyone who knows me won't be surprised. And my favorite Final Fantasy game of all time tops the list, Final Fantasy VI. A predictable choice perhaps, but I really do think it's the best game in the series. In many individual aspects, FF6 is outdone by other games. Some have better characters, some have better stories, and many have better battle systems. but I think FF6 brings it all together. It has a varied cast of characters, each of them developed and explored in a personal subquest, and it has an all-around awesome villain with Kefka, who I'll examine more in a moment. It also has a great story. Each event serves to build on the one that came before, and the progression of the story seems very logical in how things develop. The battle system is good. Players can choose between predefined characters and customize them with spells and relics, which again striking a balance between customization and rigidness. FF6's main flaws are that the overarching plot of the game is pretty much lost in the wind in the world of Ruin. Once you get the Falcon, the rest of the game is entirely wide open with no direction or goal to pursue other than exploration to find party members and items, and there's subquests to do to explore the paths of those party members. It's the opposite problem FF13 has twofold. It's too wide open, and like the first half of FF13, the second half of FF6 ignores the overarching story in favor of personal character stories. Yes, give us room to explore and develop your characters, but there has to be some road to follow to link it together, and the world of Ruin doesn't have one. The other flaw is that the game is ridiculously easy. There is never a sense of challenge at any point. Early in the game, Edgar and Sabin kill most enemies in one round, and later on enemies get tougher to survive longer but are still easily dispatched. And once you get endgame abilities like the Master, Scroll, Ultima, and Quick, even the endgame bosses are cakewalks. Overall, FF6 has a good game world, a strong plot, great characters, and a great villain. What makes it more than the sum of its parts though is something that a lot of Final Fantasy games don't portray as well as FF6, and it's what gets FF6 the top spot: the main themes. Final Fantasy VI is ultimately about a struggle everyone goes through when times get tough, the struggle of living on in spite of the pain. The party members have all gone through some deep emotional trauma in their past that they still carry the guilt for and have to learn to overcome to live their lives anew. And main heroine Terra has to find a reason to live and fight for peace in a world that's cruel, harsh, and violent. This central theme of hope and life versus death and despair is perfectly captured in Kefka, who in a thematic sense transcends his humanity to become a force of nature, a being that declares friendship and love are meaningless diversions from an inevitable death. The party has to explain to him that maybe he's right, that death is inevitable, and maybe when we die, yes, the world will forget us. But you have to keep living, because that's just how your life is. It may not be meaningful to others, but that doesn't mean it's meaningless. Your life isn't defined by the impact you make on the world, it's defined by the personal joys, triumphs, and even hardships that you face every day. The meaning of life isn't some grand cosmic riddle, the meaning of life is just life itself. Life is its own cause to live for, the good and the bad. Kefka as an embodiment of death and destruction trying to stamp out joy makes him the perfect antagonist for a party that has overcome their personal torment to champion life's gifts and declare he's wrong, when once some of them might have agreed with him. And that's why Final Fantasy VI is my pick for the best game in the series. It's a story of life, joy, and happiness, and overcoming pain to continue living and fight against despair. Its theme is demonstrated excellently in the backstory, the characters, and the villain, and with a fun, if easily exploited battle system and a deep game world to explore, it's just an awesome game from start to finish. So those have been my top 5 Final Fantasy games. As a closing statement, just because you didn't see your game on the top 5 list doesn't mean that I hate it. I think there's reasons to like all the main series Final Fantasy games, and I don't think any of them suck, not even FF8 or FF10. Now the side games not sucking, well, there's a debate for another time. So once again, thanks for watching, and sorry for the inconsistent sound quality. I made these recordings at different dates with different mic settings as I tried to troubleshoot some problems with them. This current outro recording was made with my current settings, which I think are pretty good, so this is probably what you're going to be hearing more often in the future. Once again, YouTube, this has been Drake Clothang listing his top 5 Final Fantasy games. Ciao, and see you next time.